as American commanders, buoyed by the success in the Pacific theater, initially anticipated that the assault on Peleliu would be a quick endeavor, an operation to secure an airstrip that would enhance their capabilities in the subsequent invasion of the Philippines. However, as the sun rose on September 15, 1944, revealing the scarred landscape of this small island in the Palau archipelago, the reality of the situation became abundantly clear. Featuring a network of natural defenses, its intricate coral formations, and dense underbrush, the island presented a formidable barrier for the U.S. Marines. What was planned as a swift operation instead transformed into a 73-day brutal battle, characterized by immense suffering, tactical miscalculations, and the sacrifice of countless lives. The strategy devised by American command, rooted in the belief that overwhelming force and air superiority would dictate the outcome, overlooked the tenacity of Japanese fortifications and the extent of their defensive preparations. Intelligence assessments underestimated the determination of the Imperial Japanese forces, which had spent months constructing a labyrinthine network of bunkers, pillboxes, and artillery positions, most notably concentrated on the island's northern region. Commander Keiji Shibazaki, the Japanese commander, expertly utilized the island's natural features, embedding his troops within the coral-riddled terrain, making them nearly impervious to both aerial bombardment and direct assaults. The challenges faced by the U.S. military became apparent almost immediately during the initial landings, where an extensive barrage of naval gunfire aimed to soften the beach defenses resulted in little more than smoke and confusion. As Marines disembarked from their landing crafts, they were met with a hail of machine gun fire, and amidst the cacophony of war, the reality of their predicament began to sink in. The Marines' initial strategy was reliant on synchronized assaults utilizing infantry supported by naval and air bombardment. However, as the battle unfolded, it quickly became evident that close air support was limited by the presence of their own forces, creating a tactical dilemma. One strategic blunder occurred when the decision was made to reinforce conditions on the beachhead via artillery fire, primarily from battleships positioned offshore. The heavy bombardment, while lethal against enemy fortifications, often yielded collateral damage against friendly positions, making coordination a critical yet challenging requirement. The influence of American air power was significantly mitigated under these conditions, and despite tactical alterations in real time, command structures struggled to adapt to the evolving landscape of the conflict. As the days progressed, what emerged was a chess match of attrition, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The U.S. forces, roughly 28,000 strong, faced an estimated 10,000 Japanese troops. The Marines had anticipated gaining momentum through sheer force, yet the lethality of Japanese defenders entrenched in their positions inflicted heavy losses, notably among the first wave of Marine units. This attritional dynamic highlighted critical flaws in logistical planning. Supply lines became overstretched, with troops suffering from shortages of water, ammunition, and crucial support. The insufferable heat and humidity exacerbated these conditions, while the relentless nature of warfare transformed the combat experience into a survival exercise, pushing many Marines into the brink of their limits. The psychological toll was profound, with many men grappling with the specter of their fallen comrades, amplifying a culture of resilience amidst despair. In response to the grinding stalemate, commanders such as General William H. Rupertus, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics, were compelled to re-evaluate their positions and devise new operational strategies. On the field, tactical adjustments included shifting to a phase-line approach, wherein Marines would capture segments of the battlefield incrementally. This necessitated a brutal series of frontal assaults, often faced with artillery fire and hand-to-hand combat in the densely forested areas that characterized Peleliu's terrain. For every yard of ground gained, the cost in human lives mounted, creating a staggering exchange rate wherein the fight for each inch became a macabre testament to the resolve of those involved. Medical units began to experience unprecedented strain. Field hospitals were overwhelmed with casualties, and medics frequently operated under fire, treating the injured amidst continued assaults. Innovative solutions were employed, including the rapid deployment of litter bearers and the establishment of triage stations, yet the demands exceeded their capacity. Within the chaos, moments of heroism emerged. Individual Marines would often rally to assist their comrades, pushing past fear and discomfort, and defying odds to retrieve the wounded from the front lines. The stories of sacrifice and valor painted a deeply human portrait against the backdrop of a military operation that was rapidly spiraling out of control. As the weeks passed, operational changes introduced by commanders included a decisive shift toward employing armored vehicles. The deployment of the LVT, Landing Vehicle Tract, allowed Marines to traverse challenging terrain with greater safety, but proved laborious in executing maneuvers due to the island's rugged topography. Despite these advancements, the concentrated defenses of Japanese troops rendered these efforts futile in several instances, resulting in further loss of life and assets. Likewise, heavy artillery could begin to breach some of the concealed positions within the vast network of bunkers. Still, these victories were often overshadowed by losses sustained in counterattacks. Around mid-October, the American forces began to progress more effectively toward their objectives. Nevertheless, the formidable tenacity of Japanese defenders remained a constant threat, and this extended into key engagements on points like Bloody Nose Ridge, signaling the psychological warfare interwoven with the physical struggle for territory. The fighting was marked not only by the ferocity of conventional battle, but also by the horrors of war that transcended human conflict. The paths etched into the sand and coral reflected a collective memory of sacrifice and resolve, a lesson in leadership, strategy, and the raw, unyielding spirit of the human condition amidst war. By early November, the U.S. Marine Corps officially declared the island secured, yet the cost had been devastating. The balance had tilted far from initial assumptions, transforming the 73-day struggle into one of the bloodiest engagements of the Pacific theater. The battle was wrought with lessons regarding the importance of intelligence, strategy, and the inherent unpredictability of warfare, an echo that reverberated through the ranks of all subsequent military operations. As the weary soldiers prepared to leave the battered landscape of Peleliu, the price paid for every inch of that inhospitable sand would cast a long shadow over the annals of military history, serving as a brutal reminder of the sacrifices that defined the campaign in the Pacific during World War II. As the initial weeks of the Peleliu campaign wore on, the American commanders were faced with a rapidly evolving battlefield that did not align with their strategic expectations. The operational plans, initially grounded in the belief that this would be a relatively swift engagement, quickly unraveled under the unyielding ferocity and determination of Japanese forces. The entrenched defenders on Peleliu had fortified their positions with a complex network of bunkers and pillboxes, many camouflaged within the island's rugged terrain of coral ridges and dense vegetation. Allied intelligence had underestimated the scale and effectiveness of these fortifications, a miscalculation that would have dire repercussions. Each day, American soldiers confronted a relentless barrage of artillery and small arms fire, as the deeply entrenched Japanese troops expertly executed defensive maneuvers. The Marines were forced to adapt their strategies on the fly, deploying modified tactics to address the psychological and material challenges of urban navigation inferiority and the Japanese warrior ethos, which dictated a fierce, almost fanatical dedication to their defense. One particularly brutal clash occurred at Bloody Nose Ridge, a high point that became a focal point of intense fighting. Positioned strategically, the ridge offered an advantageous vantage point for the Japanese troops and was key to their defending forces. The American strategy advanced upon this realization, aiming for a multi-phase assault to seize control of the ridge and diminish Japanese counterattacks. However, what was meant to be a swift, concentrated attack morphed into a protracted assault against well-prepared and determined defenders. As artillery and air support rained down, the Marines engaged in frontal assaults that were hindered by their own limited visibility and the treacherous terrain. Each gain was dearly purchased, as attacking units faced not only enemy fire, but also the psychological toll of repeated grim casualties. The soldiers often felt they were fighting ghosts, as heavily fortified Japanese positions absorbed the full brunt of assault, leaving the men with little respite to recover or regroup. Moreover, the tactics of the Japanese defenders, who employed a combination of conventional firearms, grenade throwers, and individual skirmishing strategies, compounded the Americans' challenges. The Japanese soldiers had trained extensively for a scenario like Peleliu, optimizing their defenses through the use of underground bunkers and interlocking fire patterns that made direct assaults exceptionally perilous. Stories emerged of American Marines who, having seized a sense of ground, found themselves stranded atop rocky outcroppings while within firing range of numerous concealed machine gun nests, unable to advance further without incurring catastrophic losses. These positions were hardly impervious to artillery fire. However, the well-designed sandbag barriers and tunnels provided a semblance of shelter even amidst the carnage, allowing Japanese soldiers to endure longer periods of attack. As the campaign dragged into its second month, the psychological struggle became as palpable as the physical one. The men found themselves in an environment devoid of any expectation of rapid resolution. Soldiers alternated between hope and despair, trapped in a cycle where small victories on the ground contrasted sharply with the staggering body counts and the lingering uncertainty surrounding their mission's ultimate objective. The beachfront had turned into a graveyard of broken equipment and lifeless bodies, a symbol of the unyielding nature of the combat that painted the island red with the anguish of desperation. American morale, while resilient on the surface, suffered under the slow bleed of optimism as the prolonged battle destroyed any initial confidence that Peleliu would be an unqualified success. Logistics played a crucial role in the unfolding drama of this brutal campaign, where bootleggers struggled to maintain supply lines as they ferried food, munitions, and medical supplies to the frontline troops. The continual push for progress invariably strained resources, and American planners scrambled to readjust. The constraints of the supply chain became evident, as equipment often failed to reach fighting Marines who were thrust into areas lacking sufficient cover or support. Ground forces advocating for air support discovered that air superiority did not equate to tactical advantage without the necessary logistics to sustain the forces fighting in the trenches. This led to logistical planning failures, resulting in troops becoming isolated, necessitating last-minute supply drop missions, which often turned into inconclusive events as paratroopers struggled with coordinates amid heavy cloud cover and hostile fire. Simultaneously, the medical situation on the ground reflected a microcosm of the larger battle's stark realities. The island's medical facilities, designed to cater to the 24-hour needs of casualties, became overwhelmed with wounded men seeking aid. The severity of injuries often resulted in painful decisions regarding triage, with medics forced to prioritize those who could survive over those who could not. This harsh reality gauntlet further exacerbated the stress on American troops, who witnessed comrades succumb to their wounds, unable to offer even the slightest shred of hope in the face of brutality beyond imagination. Ultimately, the battle for Peleliu militarily validated the challenges of unconventional warfare against determined defenders in fortified positions. Marines took ground, inch by agonizing inch, but at an immeasurable cost. By the time November rolled around, the island was declared secure, but it commemorated not victory, but rather a harsh lesson in warfare. The engagement solidified the intrinsic unpredictability of plans formulated in the sterile environments of conference rooms, where decisions often failed to take into account the tenacity of the enemy and the human stakes of conflict. As American forces regrouped to reflect on the overarching theater of war, the island's tumultuous experience would serve as a testament to the indomitable spirit of Marine tenacity, even in the face of catastrophe. Each soldier left Peleliu not just with physical scars but with memories of bravery and sacrifice that shaped their worldview, echoing in their future interactions with warfare. The campaign stood as a grim reminder of the price of territorial gains, one that would influence military commanders in both the immediate terms and in the larger narrative of World War II. In the aftermath of Peleliu, The stories of those who fought and died on the sands that witnessed such darkness remain crucial in understanding the war's human scope, urging us to reflect on the sacrifices made by all involved. Join us as we continue to uncover these hidden narratives, subscribing and sharing insights in the comments below. And remember, through the retelling of their steadfastness, we honor their bravery. The battle for Peleliu is often encapsulated as a glaring example of military overconfidence colliding with the grim realities of war. With initial intentions dictating a swift takeover of the island as a stepping stone to the Philippines, the Allied command quickly confronted an unexpected complexity manifested in the spirited resistance of Japanese forces embedded in formidable defensive positions. Strategically, Peleliu was a small but significant island in the Palau archipelago, its capture deemed essential for setting the stage for future operations against the Japanese homeland. However, the American commanders, buoyed by the promising capabilities of their infantry and supporting artillery, did not fully anticipate the extent of the island's natural and man-made fortifications, nor the ferocity of those who defended it. From the outset, American commanders were faced with critical logistical concerns. The island's geography presented a unique set of obstacles: a calcified landscape strewn with coral ridges, and a series of interconnected caves, pillboxes, and bunkers designed to absorb and repel any attacking force. The Japanese forces, numbering approximately 10,000 men under the command of Lieutenant General Takashima, executed a meticulously devised defense that favored their knowledge of the terrain while exploiting their entrenched positions. Recognizing the strength of these fortifications prior to the assault prompted the Americans to initiate an extensive naval bombardment designed to obliterate the enemy's defenses ahead of the ground invasion. For 3 days, warships of the United States Navy bombarded the island ceaselessly, their gun barrels spewing a seemingly unending hail of rounds into suspected enemy encampments. However, intelligence failures would soon reveal that the destruction had largely failed to impact the Japanese defenders' morale or combat effectiveness. On September 15, 1944, approximately 14,000 Marines from the 1st Marine Division landed on Peleliu's beaches, their objectives clear: secure the airstrip and eradicate any enemy presence. Initial landings unfolded in disarray, clouded by the inconceivable reality of combat. While some companies made swift progress across the beach, other units suffered catastrophic losses almost immediately, ambushed by concealed machine gun positions and Japanese artillery. Troops that moved inland quickly discovered that the bomb craters from the barrage provided only minimal cover. The jungle-like foliage across the terrain had adapted seamlessly with the island's rough topography, creating a living barrier that afforded Japanese defenders ample concealment. As the days turned into weeks, the battle bogged down into a grueling war of attrition. The tactical doctrine of the American forces emphasized the notion of combined arms, where infantry, armor, and artillery would work cohesively to neutralize enemy positions. However, the situation at Peleliu demonstrated the limitations of this doctrine given the entrenched and sophisticated enemy defenses. Commanders often dispatched infantry teams to probe enemy lines, only to witness the resounding effectiveness of Japanese machine guns and grenade launchers, whose valuation of life and territory turned every assault into a bloodbath. American units rotated in and out of battle lines facing counterattacks that proved costly and devastating. The relentless combat claimed not only lives, but also inflicted wounds upon the psyche of even the most seasoned Marines, who reported feeling an overwhelming sense of helplessness in the face of unyielding resistance. Amidst the disarray, leadership on the ground became paramount. Major General William Rupertus commanded the 1st Marine Division. His strategy hinged on overrunning the Japanese positions through aggressive assaults. Yet, as casualties mounted amidst the sandy shores and coral outcrops, his objectives began to waver. Effective communication faltered as well, resulting in friendly fire incidents exacerbating the chaos. Furthermore, the notion of speed as a tactical advantage met reality's brutal parameters. The anticipated 30-day engagement spiraled into an unimaginable 73-day battle, with each inch of gained territory infused with a heavy cost. The men who once landed with trepidation became embittered veterans, weathered by the treachery of warfare, witnessing casualties that reached nearly 9,000, with over 1,500 American Marines killed in action. The struggle at Peleliu also bore witness to the evolution of the human condition amidst warfare. Soldiers grappled with despair, their endurance pushed to the limits of physical and psychological thresholds. Brotherhood became a vital component of the Marines' ability to withstand the onslaught. Accounts of individual heroism emerged where Marines saved comrades despite overwhelming adversity. The ethos of "no man left behind" often stood as the only consolation amongst the ruins of camaraderie. Keenly aware of the duality of war, they traversed a battlefield that became a microcosm of conflict's horror and beauty. Of particular note was Corporal William "Wild Bill" Red, who, despite shrapnel wounds, made repeated forays into the fray to rescue his fellow Marines, his actions symbolizing the intertwining of valor and vulnerability that characterized the experience. Each story, innumerable in its cadence, echoed through the ranks, binding together memories of survival and sacrifice. As the American forces clawed their way to the final vestiges of resistance, the realization that the fight for Peleliu was emblematic of the broader campaigns of World War II loomed large. The price of victory echoed through the military ranks, serving as an admonition against underestimating enemy resolve. The devastating toll on American forces reshaped the military's strategic outlook and compelled a reassessment of operational tactics moving forward. Lessons extracted from Peleliu would resonate in the subsequent engagements in the Pacific, with commanders increasingly prioritizing comprehensive intelligence and understanding the tenacity of enemy forces fortified by geographical terrain. Ultimately, the consequences of the battle extended beyond mere territorial control. Peleliu served as a poignant reminder of the human cost of war, illustrating a convergence of strategy, sacrifice, and suffering that defined much of the American experience during World War II. For those who trudged through the sands of Peleliu, the stakes were inescapably personal. They carried not only their physical burdens but also the weight of their fallen brothers and the haunting memories of men who fought valiantly against insurmountable odds. As the final embers of battle faded, Peleliu remained an indelible testament to the unpredictability of warfare, imbued with stories that reverberate through time, demanding remembrance and reflection on the complexities of sacrifice that define the human experience in the theater of war. The Battle of Peleliu, a seemingly minor operation compared to the broader scale of World War II, revealed itself as a crucible of iron-willed perseverance and tactical exigencies. When American commanders initially planned the assault, they anticipated a swift, decisive victory that would solidify their strategic foothold in the Pacific, ensuring a pathway to the Philippines and beyond. In their war room assessments, the expectation was that capturing Peleliu would take mere days, perhaps 3, but no more than 5. They theorized that the inadequately fortified Japanese garrison couldn't effectively withstand a conventional assault by Marine forces, an assessment steeped more in wishful optimism than a pragmatic understanding of the terrain and the spirit of the defenders awaiting them in the coral-bound paradise. Commanders underestimated both the tenacity of the Japanese defenders and the unforgiving nature of the island. Peleliu, roughly 2 miles long and less than a mile wide, presented its own set of formidable challenges. The island was an amalgamation of coral ridges, rugged terrain, and several dense patches of jungle, making strategic navigation a daunting endeavor. In the hands of the beleaguered but resolute Japanese forces, this landscape metamorphosed into a veritable fortress. The fortified positions were primarily located along the northern ridges, where the Japanese troops had expertly utilized the island's natural features to create a complex network of bunkers, pillboxes, and trenches, augmented by a labyrinth of interconnected tunnels designed to withstand aerial bombardment and provide quick avenues for tactical retreat or re-engagement. As the American forces landed on September 15, 1944, they were met with a storm of gunfire and artillery shells. Despite their comprehensive preparation, which included intense aerial bombardment aimed at softening enemy defenses for an expected overwhelming ground assault, the Marines found themselves immediately ensnared in a brutal struggle against an opponent who had chosen to fight to the last man. The initial landings, characterized by dense gunfire and the chaotic roar of war, starkly contrasted the anticipated operational smoothness. Tactical decisions shifted almost instantaneously from planned assaults to desperate attempts at securing footholds, not just for the Marine units, but for the ideals of American ingenuity and determination, which underpinned their campaign objectives. Commanders rapidly learned that their assessment of a short campaign had been deeply flawed. The escalation from calculated offensive to protracted engagement highlighted the critical need for adaptability and responsiveness in military operations. Major General William H. Rupertus, commanding the 1st Marine Division, found his forces entrenched in unexpectedly heavy resistance, as Japanese forces utilized their intimate knowledge of the terrain to channel American movements into kill zones. The terrain, severe and unyielding, presented American troops with both visibility limitations and severe logistical constraints. Full operational mobility was stymied by heavy jungle, deep coral, and interlocking fields of fire. As American forces transitioned from initial shock to tactical recalibration, a grisly pattern emerged. The slow, arduous nature of the ground assault demanded relentless tenacity. The Marines pushed alongside the coral cliffs, adopting the strategy of bypass and isolate, which involved maneuvering around pockets of stubborn resistance instead of engaging directly, an approach that was both resource-intensive and psychologically demoralizing. The swimming pools of blood and sorrow served as a stark reminder of the human cost of adherence to operational protocols that disregarded battlefield realities. Each inch gained was a testament to both the valor and suffering of the soldiers, many of whom became ghosts among the petrified remnants of their fallen brothers. As days turned into weeks, the combat became increasingly intimate. Close-quarters battles erupted amidst the chaos, with Marines frequently forced to engage in hand-to-hand combat. They fought through the jungle undergrowth and across sandy beaches strewn with abandoned equipment and human remains, each corner turned revealing yet another hostile enclave, where survival was contingent upon sheer willpower and solidarity among comrades. Corporal Red's valor, emblematic of the fierce bonds formed between soldiers, was sorely tested as he repeatedly defied the cascading dangers of sniper fire and mortar explosions, each time dragging fellow Marines to safety, while increasingly recalling the faces of those who had already perished under the onslaught. On the tactical front, intelligence gathering began to play a pivotal role, as forward observers and reconnaissance units sought any swath of information that could disrupt the aberrant flow of battle. The Marines' extensive training in combining firepower with maneuvering units yielded dividends. They increasingly employed medium tanks and flamethrowers, indispensable in the regulation of entrenched enemy fighters. Importantly, the deployment of aerial support transformed, as precision airstrikes on specific bunkers supported soldiers at the ground's edge. However, this reliance on air power also highlighted the intricate balance of coordinated assaults and the need for conservational tactics to sustain air resources for optimal application over the progressively drawn-out battle duration. With zero-sum calculations of time and resource increasingly imbalanced, American commanders found themselves revising their operations continuously. The transformation from hasty assaults to methodical clearing operations required not only quick decision-making, but also the heavy commitment of logistics, namely, transporting vital supplies through hostile territory while maintaining a tempo of engagement that kept the Japanese forces off guard. This relentless push for repeated conquest over the villages and ridges allowed the Americans to claim small tactical victories, while simultaneously contributing to their cognitive dissonance regarding the mission's overarching design. The choice to fortify their positions at the southern end of the island reflected the operational shift into attritional warfare. Much of the island's precious terrain turned into a hellscape, a testament to human cost as both sides suffered immense losses, yet displayed resolute determination. The parallel currents within this turmoil were the intersecting stories of combatants. Men on both sides were deeply humanized in their shared experiences of fear, courage, and loss, drawing stark lines between duty and survival within a grotesque theater that blurred the moral complexities of their engagement. By the battle's end, after a staggering 73 days of incessant combat, the cost versus benefit analysis yielded staggering losses. The ultimate capture of Peleliu did, after all, pave the way for subsequent operations and contributed to the Pacific strategy. However, it could hardly be envisaged as a traditional victory. The echoes of gunfire and the agonizing cries of wounded men lingered eternally, seeping into the collective consciousness, reminding future military leaders that not every campaign can be distilled into strategic triumph or operational success. The siege of Peleliu ultimately crystallized the harsh lessons of warfare, striking a poignant balance between anticipated glory on the battlefield and the grim realities of loss, entrenchment, and survival under insurgent fire. The lessons learned from Peleliu would reverberate through the tides of subsequent conflicts, challenging future commanders to not only measure tactical capabilities, but to consider the profound human elements of sacrifice, mortality, and brotherhood etched into the very sands of Peleliu, clutching the memories of the fallen as a haunting witness to the brutality of war. Understanding the transformation from initial engagements to protracted conflict became not just a lesson in military doctrine, but a sobering testament to the visceral experiences endured by those sent forth to confront the specter of war and the costs that go far beyond mere geography. As the days unfolded during the Battle of Peleliu, American commanders found themselves enveloped in a maelstrom of shifting landscapes and ever-increasing casualty counts. Initially, the plan was predicated on a swift amphibious landing, followed by a rapid advance to secure the airfields, deemed crucial for the broader strategy in the Pacific theater. However, as combat unfolded, the engagement morphed from a calculated assault into a grueling test of endurance, one where every inch of territory came at a horrific price. The island's rugged coral outcroppings, covered with dense mangrove swamps, offered exceptional defensive advantages to the entrenched Japanese forces. Major General William H. Rupertus, the American commander on the ground, foreseen an operation that would last only a few days. Reality, however, dictated otherwise. The island was significantly fortified by the Japanese, who had invested considerable time in creating a network of tunnels and bunkers that rendered conventional assault strategies less effective. The Japanese military, under the command of Lieutenant General Kuniaki Koiso, was not only prepared but had meticulously crafted a final stand, resisting American advances in a bid to buy precious time for the defense of the Philippines. The initial American assault on September 15, 1944, resulted in heavy U.S. Navy casualties due to concentrated land-based artillery fire, revealing strategic oversights in the planning phases that underestimated the tenacity of the enemy's resolve. The U.S. forces quickly learned that the terrain, a coral-based island ringed by shallow water and jagged reefs, was as much an enemy as the soldiers they faced. In the chaos of combat, tactics evolved at a rapid pace. As frontal assaults led to mounting American casualties, the commanding general, Rupertus, adopted a more deliberate strategy. This included combined arms operations incorporating infantry, armor, and artillery in a synergistic effort to incapacitate Japanese positions. The Marines began employing enveloping maneuvers to bypass fortified points, thus forcing the defenders into a state of disarray. However, even these adaptations involved severe trade-offs. The decision to bypass certain strongholds meant they often had to deal with reinvigorated enemy fire from the flanks as they pressed deeper into the island. By late September, the battle had firmly transitioned into the phase of attrition, requiring immense logistical support and the unyielding morale of soldiers who endured relentless assaults while constantly aware that the threat of ambush loomed continuously. Logistics came to play a critical role as well. The Pacific theater stretched supply lines to their limits. Heavy equipment, munitions, and medical supplies needed to be meticulously coordinated to reach the front lines. The Marines, under constant bombardment, found that their initial logistics frameworks were no longer sufficient. Vehicles that could transport supplies became targets, while landing zones were rapidly transformed into debris fields, complicating deliveries. Resupply vessels faced the dangers of kamikaze attacks and underwater obstacles, heightening the precarious nature of maintaining a steady flow of materials to sustain operations. The Navy's ability to provide reliable naval gunfire support dwindled as enemy fire became more accurate, further complicating the supply chain and impacting morale. The officers on the ground, who previously envisioned the battle as a rapid victory, now grappled with a different reality, sustaining their men in a deeply hostile environment where each advance might lead to significant loss. As the battle ground on into October, the mounting human cost weighed heavily on the troops. American soldiers faced not only the grim conditions of war, extreme heat, limited rations, and incessant physical strain, but they also encountered the psychological toll of continued combat in a seemingly unwinnable situation. The pervasive sounds of gunfire, the screams of the wounded, and the relentless sight of fellow Marines succumbing to injury began to foster an environment steeped in despair. The psychological burden compounded as troops learned to navigate their fear, pushing through in solidarity with their brothers in arms. This unyielding spirit would characterize the American troops' resolve, even as they witnessed the effects of war transform their comrades into memories left behind in the sand. Stories emerged of soldiers using makeshift stretchers and even their own bodies to shield the wounded from enemy fire, a stark demonstration of the compassion found amid chaos. Despite the difficulties, there were moments of hope and resilience as well. The men found solace in camaraderie, sharing food rations when possible, and forming bonds that would endure long after the bullets ceased to fly. The bravery displayed was not merely in the individual acts of valor. It resided in the collective spirit of the units, whose tenacity refuted despair in light of overwhelming odds. Yet, the human connections forged in the face of adversity were layered in a complexity that exposed the dual nature of war, sacrifice intermingled with existential dread. The higher command echelon, aware of the grim realities unfolding, began to reconsider their strategic priorities and the human cost of the campaign. Advisors and commanders within the United States were painfully aware that this fight must yield tangible results to keep the pressure off other ongoing engagements, such as the Philippines campaign. As a military tactic, maintaining operational continuity through the Pacific required sacrifices at Peleliu to ensure that the path could eventually link with other significant fronts. Commanders debated whether the brutal attritional fight at Peleliu truly afforded any broader advantage. Was this strategy of seizing the island, itself only a small stepping stone relative to the larger struggle, proportional to the immense sacrifice being exacted from every Marine who traversed its poisoned sands? By the battle's conclusion on November 27, 1944, the outcome was encased in a peculiar veneer of both accomplishment and tragedy. The island had been seized, and the airstrip secured. However, the staggering toll of lives lost, the 1,500 American dead and another 5,000 injured, revealed a sobering truth about the price of victory in war. The realities of Peleliu etched deeper scars into the American military psyche. A clear understanding emerged that the geography captured did not equate to success when viewed through the lens of human cost. This battle served not only as a tactical maneuver in a broader campaign, but as a harbinger of the harrowing decisions that commanders would face in future conflicts, compounding the lessons learned as they grappled with the sacrificial elements that surged forth in every skirmish. The remnants of those who fought on Peleliu became symbols of a harrowing yet poignant reality. Men sent into hell and asked to return bearing the weight of war's immutable legacy. The human suffering endured during those 73 days would resonate through history, beckoning serious reflection among leaders considering the full spectrum of costs entailed in warfare. A solemn reminder echoed in the sands of Peleliu, ensuring that the legacy of sacrifice did not fade from memory, but remained imprinted in the corridors of military strategy and human conscience alike. With the lessons gleaned from this brutal confrontation, new generations of military leaders would face the challenge of incorporating not just tactics and strategies, but the fundamental humanity that underpins the very act of going to war. As this documentary continues to explore the profound legacies of battles such as Peleliu, audiences are invited to delve deeper into the experiences of those who shaped the course of history through their resilience and sacrifice. If you have suggestions for new themes or battles in the context of World War II, or if you're eager to learn more about the untold stories of bravery, please consider subscribing for more insightful narratives that honor those who walked through the flames of history. As the battle for Peleliu unfolded, it became increasingly evident that the American military had underestimated both the strategic complexity of the terrain and the tenacity of the Japanese defenders. Initially conceived as a brief operation, intended to last only a few days to secure a vital airstrip for future Allied operations, the invasion quickly morphed into a grueling slog that would challenge every assumption held by commanders regarding the nature of warfare in the Pacific theater. Littered with rugged coral outcroppings, dense vegetation, and craggy fortified positions, Peleliu emerged as a landscape where traditional military tactics risked falling short against a determined enemy prepared to exploit every inch of the island's geography. Commanders on the ground faced immediate and unrelenting resistance from Japanese forces, who had fortified themselves within a meticulously crafted network of bunkers, caves, and pillboxes. This was not a battlefield of open fields, where maneuverability and overwhelming firepower could secure rapid advances. Instead, it was a setting that required different modalities of fighting. The Japanese troops, under the command of General Sadao Kijima, were deeply entrenched and had been instructed to inflict maximum casualties on the Americans. Each attacking wave, comprising Marine battalions armed with rifles, machine guns, and mortars, encountered a relentless fire that cascaded down from hidden positions. The psychological toll on troops was exacerbated by the nature of the fighting, which demanded not only tactical acumen, but also immense mental fortitude, as each inch of territory was contested with ferocity. As the operation dragged on, the logistics of sustaining the campaign became increasingly intricate. The Marines had landed on Peleliu on September 15, 1944, only to find themselves bogged down in a tactic known as island hopping, which, despite its intended efficiency, soon revealed its limitations in the tumultuous realm of ground warfare. Resupply efforts were hampered by a host of factors, including the narrow beachheads that allowed for minimal movement of supplies and personnel, and the constant threat posed by Japanese artillery and sniper fire. Oftentimes, resupply boats could not approach the shore without facing engagement. Moreover, the besieged Marines had to deal with the stifling heat of the island, which exacerbated grievances among the troops who were beginning to experience exhaustion and heat-related illnesses. A glimmer of hope arose through the coordination of air and naval support. However, the execution was fraught with challenges. The U.S. Navy engaged in heavy bombardments prior to landings, which, in retrospect, can be viewed as both a necessary and a flawed strategy. These preliminary strikes aimed to soften Japanese defenses, but the effectiveness was undermined by the Japanese practice of building their bunkers deep into the reef and coral formations. Time and again, the initial bombardments provided a false sense of security, encouraging the Marines to advance only to find the Japanese forces intact and ready for combat. Lives lost due to underestimation of enemy fortifications served as a grim reminder of the necessity of accurate intelligence, something that proved to be a major obstacle throughout the battle. As days turned into weeks, the human cost mounted tragically. Each new battalion sent in suffered staggering losses, often resulting in entire units being decimated within moments of breaching enemy lines. The 1st Marine Division, tasked with making headway through the island, faced an unyielding combat experience that drove some to the brink. Reports of disillusionment surfaced among the men, revealing not just a crisis of morale, but a piercing sense of isolation amid overwhelming firepower. Even as divisions continued to push forward, The psychological impacts of witnessing comrades fall, some to mere yards from them, were profound. In periods of relative quiet, some soldiers grappled with their sense of purpose, questioning the necessity of the operation. Did the airstrip truly justify such sacrifice? Frustration became a central theme for commanders as well. General William Rupertus, the commanding officer of the 1st Marine Division, found his optimistic predictions increasingly at odds with the grim reality confronting his men. The disparity between what strategy dictated and the everyday chaos of warfare created tensions within the command structure and between units, some experiencing immediate crises of command just as battalion soldiers were overwhelmed in their efforts for ground advancement. The brutal attrition did not lead to the anticipated morale boost. Instead, it sowed seeds of doubt and second-guessing among the ranks, strategic miscalculations stemming from both the difficulty of communication and the ever-persistent fog of war, complicating decisions on the ground. As the battle persisted, elements of enemy strategy also became clear. The Japanese, committed to the defense of their positions, encroached on the concept of total warfare, utilizing every weapon at their disposal to maximize harm. Kamikaze factors from the air contributed to the mounting loss of ships and personnel, creating a dynamic that not only targeted military assets, but also relegated sailors to the continuous stress of an unpredictable theater. The fact that U.S. forces were compelled to strike back amidst heavy air assaults indicated not only the scale of their predicament, but revealed the layered dimensions of the battle for Peleliu, as it became intertwined with broader strategic considerations of the ongoing Pacific campaign. By the time the island was finally declared secure in late November 1944, at a staggering cost of life and an intangible toll on morale and resolve, the lessons learned could only outline the prohibitive challenges faced in future operations. The protracted combat of Peleliu pushed the boundaries of contemporary military thought, emphasizing the continued evolution of doctrine around entrenched positions and urban warfare, while simultaneously casting a long shadow over the commanders and soldiers that now bore the weight of history upon their shoulders. In understanding Peleliu's depth, both in terms of tactical engagement and human experiences, clearer portraits formed of the pivotal nature of sacrifice in the military domain, forever etching the island's legacy into the annals of warfare. This battle became a stark reminder that victory is but a hollow echo when measured against the enormity of the human cost. The ramifications of leadership decisions made in these combat scenarios resonate through time, inspiring ongoing discourse among military experts on the ethical considerations inherent in warfare. As the days stretched into weeks during the Battle of Peleliu, the initial expectations of a swift victory faded into the heavy mists of attrition and desperation. Commanders in the Pacific Theater were confronted with a reality that was far removed from their strategic planning sessions. The island, though compact, turned out to be a formidable fortress for the Japanese forces, who had fortified their positions through an extensive network of bunkers, tunnels, and pillboxes that were deeply entrenched within the coral substrate. This defensive architecture was not merely a reflection of a tactical choice, but was emblematic of a military philosophy honed through years of conflict. The Japanese troops, significantly outnumbered but fiercely committed to their cause, defined their strategy through the lens of maximizing the U.S. invasion's cost, fully adopting the principle of shikiryo, or the idea of fighting to the last man. This presented American commanders, including Lieutenant General Holland Smith, with a critical conundrum. The price of victory would be steep, and might overshadow strategic gains that Peleliu was meant to yield. From the outset, the operational plan devised by U.S. commanders foresaw a rapid assault to capture the island in a matter of days, which was essential for securing the Palau Islands and establishing an airfield critical for future operations, particularly against the Philippines. However, the realities on the ground dictated otherwise. The coordination of amphibious assaults was plagued by logistical miscalculations. Over-reliance on naval gunfire support to soften Japanese defenses resulted in substantial shortfalls, as many artillery rounds fell short of their targets or failed to address the fortified positions effectively. Inadequate reconnaissance compounded the disarray by creating a veil of uncertainty regarding the extent and condition of enemy fortifications. As the 1st Marine Division landed on September 15, 1944, they were forced to encounter a fierce counteroffensive that was both unexpected and unforgiving. The tactics employed by the Marines evolved amidst the chaos. The initial wave met significant resistance, leading to heavy casualties. As American troops pushed inward, they honed their assault strategies to include the use of flamethrowers and demolitions, focusing on neutralizing strong points with a determined ferocity. Yet even these measures came at a horrendous cost. The brutal terrain, characterized by its coral ridges and steep inclines, proved inhospitable, turning every advance into a relentless struggle against not only the deployed enemy, but the environment itself. The Marines' desperate rush for the airfield became a futile endeavor. Stalled at every turn, they were subjected to a harrowing amalgamation of machine gun fire and well-placed artillery shells. The courage exhibited during these combat encounters spoke volumes about the human spirit. Yet these acts of valor were shadowed by the decimation of battalions and the psychological toll exacted on those who survived. As the battle entered its 2nd month, the fog of war both obscured and illuminated the thinking of commanding officers. Previously unthinkable tactics began to emerge. Leadership, faced with the grim reality of diminishing options, considered more integrated and coordinated assaults. Despite experiencing a high turnover of personnel due to casualties, commanders were often left with seasoned veterans whose combat experience paradoxically breeded both resolve and jaded outlooks. Communication, or the lack thereof, became a critical factor as commanding officers struggled to relay orders amid the cacophony of gunfire and the confusion that clouded the battlefield. Field radios often malfunctioned or fell silent, and written orders were frequently misinterpreted or lost. The Japanese defenders, benefiting from an intrinsic advantage of knowledge of their own terrain and an unyielding supply of reinforcements, turned the island into a deadly arena of attrition. Counteroffensives became more nuanced, as intelligence gathered suggested that the Japanese forces began adapting tactics to focus on isolating and eliminating key Marine units, executing ambushes with deadly effectiveness. The psychological impact further burdened the mindsets of the Marines, who learned to expect the unexpected, an ever-present threat that left them vulnerable not only to physical ambushes, but to the torment of their own fears. Casualties mounted daily, creating a morose rhythm that permeated the ranks of both sides. As the stakes escalated, the deployment of new technologies also altered the contours of the battle. On the American side, there was an increased reliance on air support, artillery barrages, and naval bombardments, each meant to provide the needed firepower to achieve breakthroughs. However, the precision necessary for these operations was challenging to maintain amidst the fog and confusion of battle. The Japanese, conversely, utilized their own innovations, employing night raids and interspersed skirmishes that prevented U.S. forces from reorganizing effectively. As energy waned and resources dwindled, the sections of the island transformed into cauldrons of chaos, where the boundary between attackers and defenders blurred into a symphony of violence. Onto the mosaic of devastation came stories that humanized the statistics and body counts. Whether among seasoned soldiers engaged in a dance of death or the fresh-faced recruits thrust into an inferno, human experiences shaped the narrative of Peleliu. Letters home detailed not just the hellish bombardments, but also moments of brotherhood, sacrifice, and somber reflection. The accounts of struggles to overcome not only physical hurdles, but the emotional burdens encapsulated the very spirit of warfare. The ties that bound these soldiers became their lifelines as they battled despair and sought meaning in the chaos surrounding them. And yet, the cost of camaraderie was not to be trifled with. For every bond forged, there was a price that verged on unspeakable loss. Ultimately, the end of the battle in late November yielded a hollow victory. Although the airfield was secured, the exorbitant human cost rendered questions about the strategic value of Peleliu both poignant and pervasive. The military successes gained in that conflict were marred by the heavy toll and dwindling morale that pockmarked the ranks of the Marines. In reflecting upon the legacy of Peleliu, military theorists and historians would ultimately regard it as more than a battle for an island. It would stand as a cautionary tale about the unpredictable nature of war, the limits of leadership under fire, and the profound consequences that reverberate through time within the context of human experience in warfare. The island became a sobering monument to sacrifice, wherein the echoes of valor and anguish would forever remind future generations that the price of victory carries with it not merely the weight of numbers, but the resounding silence of lives left forever altered. As the battle for Peleliu dragged into its grueling phase, the initial strategies conceived by American commanders were dissected by the unforgiving reality of war. The island, envisioned as a quick capture to secure the airfield for operations in the Philippines, became a crucible of attrition. The United States Marine Corps and Army faced unforeseen resistance from the entrenched Japanese forces, who cleverly manipulated the island's terrain to their advantage. Camouflaged bunkers and artillery positions were interwoven within the rugged landscape, providing the defenders with a staunch defensive posture that belied their smaller numbers. The Japanese High Command had surmised that by fortifying the island and sustaining a vigorous defense, they could inflict significant casualties and stymie the American advance, a gamble that would morph into an expensive stalemate for both sides. Operationally, the Marines encountered severe challenges in adapting their tactics. The island's coral ridges, craggy ravines, and narrow beaches, which had appeared as mere geographic features in their strategic assessments, quickly transformed into formidable obstacles. Transport and logistics became pivotal. Supply lines stretched thin as troops faced difficulties in moving equipment across the hostile terrain. The assault, originally planned for a swift capture, devolved into a tactical nightmare characterized by brutal close-quarters combat, where artillery and air support could only provide sporadic assistance amidst relentless enemy fire. The amphibious landings, facilitated by the Navy's formidable fleet, initially underestimated the defenses awaiting them, leading to staggering losses as the Marines faced withering gunfire from concealed positions. Casualty rates surged as commanders assessed the efficacy of their strategies in real time. The Marines were trained to seize ground through coordinated assaults and rapid advances. However, the prolonged engagements rendered these tactics less effective. Platoons became entrenched in fierce firefights, losing the mobility they relied upon. The weight of leadership pressed heavily upon commanders like Lieutenant General William H. Rupertus, who had initially believed the campaign could be concluded within weeks. The reality of static positional warfare contrasted sharply with their expectations. As they assessed the strategic value of holding Peleliu while grappling with the rising cost in lives, the psychological impact of prolonged combat began to manifest. Brothers in arms became witnesses to the inescapable horrors of war. The harrowing eyewitness accounts detailed not just the tactical realities, but the profound emotional strain etched upon the faces of young men battling both enemy fire and the elements. As days turned into weeks, their existence oscillated between fleeting moments of hope and the pervasive gloom of encroaching death. Letters penned to loved ones reflected an awakening to the brutal nature of their undertaking, marked by a disillusionment that deepened as the battle wore on. The soldiers drew strength from camaraderie, forming unbreakable bonds while grappling with an intricate web of emotions. As they mourned fallen friends and fought through horrific injuries, the shared trauma became a defining aspect of their collective identity. The weather added another layer of complexity to the unfolding saga of Peleliu. The oppressive heat and humidity exacerbated the already tough conditions, creating fears of disease as the battlefield turned into a morass of filth and decay. The Marines faced not just bullets and bombs, but the ever-looming specter of illness. Tropical diseases threatened to diminish their ranks even further. Leadership responses turned toward ensuring proper medical care through established field hospitals, yet the need for care far outweighed the available resources. Suffering became endemic, not solely through combat, but through deprivation of basic needs, as supplies dwindled against the backdrop of sustained conflict. Amidst the existential labyrinth was the unsettling awareness that the battle's objectives had shifted. Initial goals focused on capturing the airfields morphed into a desperate struggle for survival and honor. The operational narrative fragmented as commanders encountered the dire prospects of continuing without clear, achievable goals. The issue of whether to prolong the fight or seek a strategic retreat marred their discussions, raised by the specter of mounting casualties. Yet another dilemma presented. Could the Marines earn back the honor of their mission amid disillusionment and the staggering losses experienced? As September edged into October, the ferocity of the Japanese resistance convinced many commanders on the ground of the strategic value of each inch of territory. Casualty figures became the unyielding barometer of success. Marines secured hilltops and ridges at a staggering cost, often pushing through only to find themselves trapped in the mire of static warfare. Each small victory became marred by the bloodshed that preceded it. The Japanese defenders, under the command of General Ushijima, employed guerrilla tactics and elevated their defenses. The arrival of the 81st Infantry Division, a fresh contingent meant to support the beleaguered Marines, did little to stem the tide of violence. All they faced upon reaching Peleliu was a steeple of death, as both sides continued to cling fiercely to their objectives. In those somber days of October, the intensity of combat intensified alongside the emotional toll on the soldiers. The epic desolation imbued the landscape with a sense of foreboding as corpses began to accumulate, fates marked by the indiscriminate brutality of warfare. Sharing the burden of loss became ritualistic. The acknowledgement of dead comrades forged a bond of resolve among surviving soldiers who now identified victory not through the lens of conquest, but through persistence amidst despair. Each fallen Marine was a ghost haunting the collective psyche of their unit. Even as the men pressed forward against the encroaching enemy, the essence of the battle transformed. Peleliu, once a strategic asset, stood instead as an emblem of sacrifice, a testament to the uncompromising nature of their existence. By the end of October, after grueling weeks of combat, the cost of securing Peleliu became evident. The Allies had succeeded in capturing the airfield, but the realization of a hollow victory echoed through the ranks of soldiers and commanding officers alike. Tactical victory elicited open debate. Had the blood spilled outweighed the strategic gains? What started as a campaign aimed at a rapid offensive established an enduring legacy embedded within the uncertainty of warfare. The psychological scars etched upon the survivors lasted far longer than the battle itself, a lingering shadow shrouding the memory of their actions as they endeavored back to a world that would never fully comprehend the magnitude of their sacrifice. Peleliu would not be remembered merely as a geographic point on a map, but as a poignant chapter steeped in the human experience of war. In time, historians and military strategists would contemplate its lessons: the price of overconfidence, the toll of inexperience in high command, and the grim realities of decisions made amidst chaos. Here, the echoes of sacrifice expanded into the annals of military history, a reminder that war is as much about human cost as it is about strategic gains, a dichotomy that remains ever present, woven into the fabric of nations engaged in a relentless pursuit of victory amidst the specter of loss. As the battles raged on at Peleliu, the tactical complexities of the campaign crystallized into a grim and harrowing reality that transcended mere military operations. Initial expectations had envisioned a swift and decisive confrontation, one that would pave the way for future offensives in the Pacific theater. However, the realities of terrain, the tenacity of Japanese defenders, and the evolving strategies of the American forces transformed what was to be a short engagement into an arduous saga of attrition that spanned 73 long days. This quagmire of conflict illustrated the stark differences between the planning phase of warfare and the unpredictable nature of actual combat, where any semblance of a clear plan was often swallowed by chaos and carnage. The island's topography played a crucial role in dictating the effectiveness of American tactics. Initially, intelligence suggested that Peleliu's coral ridges and steep hillsides would offer minimal resistance. Yet, as the United States Marines landed on September 15, 1944, they were met not merely by an entrenched enemy, but by a well-fortified defense that utilized the natural landscape with lethal effectiveness. The Japanese 33rd Infantry Regiment, under the command of General Nishi, fortified bunkers, caves, and artillery positions throughout the island. This fortification formed an interconnected web of defenses that allowed defenders to envelop American forces, resulting in a disorienting and deadly crossfire. Sudden bursts of gunfire and the constant presence of sniper fire disoriented attacking Marines, turning every inch of ground gained into a perilous endeavor, demanding the utmost in courage and resilience. As the campaign progressed, American commanders were compelled to adapt their strategies, evolving from frontal assaults that pushed units directly into enemy-held positions to more tactical approaches that emphasized the consolidation of forces, indirect fire support, and combined arms operations. Artillery, air support, and infantry coordination became foundational to the evolving strategy. Naval bombardments prior to landings had provided some measure of preparation. However, the reality of enemy fortifications rendered many of these preemptive strikes largely ineffective. The need for more granular intelligence and real-time reconnaissance became increasingly apparent as Marines learned that the enemy was capable of absorbing tremendous punishment while maintaining their defensive posture. The fog of war thickened as communication lines were often disrupted, leading to fragility in the command structure and command decisions that would have immediate and lasting consequences. As the weeks dragged on, the human element of the conflict grew ever more pronounced, the psychological toll of the attrition warfare inflicting as much damage as enemy fire. American forces had come to take control of various strategic locations, yet the cost of such victories became inexorably intertwined with the personal experiences of the soldiers involved. Each forward movement was marked by intense firefights and significant casualties. Marine units became closely knit through shared hardship and survival, yet they also bore individual burdens of grief and loss that tightly interlaced with the determination to fight on. The concept of the combat brotherhood emerged as an organic mechanism meant to shield the men against both the physical horrors surrounding them and the mental anguish of witnessing peers fall to the ground, their lives snuffed out in the blink of an eye. The Japanese defenders, familiar with the terrain and possessing an unwavering resolve, maintained a fierce and tenacious defense. As the battle progressed, they employed tactical maneuvers that included counterattacks against American positions, small unit infiltration tactics, and a commitment to last-ditch survival. Despite the overwhelming material superiority of American forces, including artillery numbers and air support, the defenders of Peleliu resisted with unlikely tenacity, upheld by their chosen doctrine of fighting to the last man. This ideological commitment, coupled with an understanding of their homeland's geography, blinded them to the brutal reality that their sacrifice would serve to honor, not reward, their collective spirit. Yet, within the confines of an individual soldier's fear and determination, their resolve formed a barrier that American forces were forced to reckon with on a daily basis. As casualties mounted on both sides, with metrics of death and injury demonstrating an unsustainable price of victory, the ramifications reverberated back to American command in the Pacific. Strategic assessments of Peleliu led to debates over operational planning and execution. The Marine Corps had maintained a robust operational tempo throughout the war, yet the experience on Peleliu forced a re-evaluation of tactics and strategies for subsequent campaigns. Lessons learned from Peleliu would intentionally influence targeting decisions in future battles, particularly regarding logistics and troop morale. Peleliu also highlighted the need for improved medical logistics and personnel care. The relentless pressure of the battle created a demand for effective triage and evacuation systems. Marines often faced wild variations in access to care due to the nature of combat operations. The proximity of frontline positions to medical facilities drastically impacted survival rates for those wounded. Echelons of care demanded rapid and effective responses, leading to innovations in battlefield medicine. As Marines navigated through the ravaged landscape, they would encounter both their fallen comrades and the images of heroism displayed by medics who often marched alongside their brothers in arms, ready to provide aid amidst chaos, dedicating themselves to the principle of saving lives under impossible conditions. In the aftermath of the Battle of Peleliu, the emotional scars lingered long after the physical and strategic assessments had been made. The burden of heavy casualties, compounded with uncertainty and long-term strategic gains, meant that Peleliu would not stand merely as a testament to American military resolve, but rather a jarring reminder of warfare's brutal toll. It became crystallized in the memories of those who fought there, standing as a chapter that devoured not only the immediacy of victory, but also the depth of human suffering. Each retained memory of loss, valor, and fear extended beyond the battle itself, embedding within the very heart of the Marine Corps ethos. What is endured in battle is immeasurable in its impact and resonance in the chronicles of warfare. Peleliu's legacy emerged not just from valor, but from a shared humanity imbued with despair, sacrifice, and the unwavering insistence on continuing to fight when logic dictated otherwise. The echoes of that fateful campaign would serve future generations, a reflective inquiry not on the nature of battles won or lost, but on the indelible human cost inscribed within the annals of military history. The Battle of Peleliu, which began in September 1944, was ostensibly envisioned by American military planners as a relatively swift operation, intended to secure an airbase that would support future operations in the Philippines and ultimately the invasion of Japan. However, the reality on the ground proved far more complex. The Marines faced not only a formidable array of Japanese fortifications that had been meticulously prepared over years, but also an island terrain that defied straightforward military tactics. The southern beaches, where initial landings were to take place, were lined with coral ridges and a series of concealed bunkers, pits, and interconnected networks that housed Japanese defenders. American commanders quickly learned that the Japanese were ready and resolute, determined to hold their ground through entrenched defenses that would cost the attacking forces far more than anticipated. In the early days of the assault, American forces landed on Peleliu with the hope of achieving surprise and overwhelming force. They utilized amphibious landings, employing divisions of Marines, and supporting naval bombardments to annihilate entrenched enemy positions. However, the aerial bombardments, while designed to soften resistance, often fell short of their intended mark, allowing many Japanese soldiers to remain largely intact within their fortifications. This miscalculation boosted enemy morale and emboldened them in their fight. The brutality of the ensuing combat, characterized by fierce encounters and heavy casualties, illustrated a crucial lesson in military strategy: the importance of accurate intelligence in shaping operational expectations. The underestimation of Japanese tenacity and resourcefulness would come to haunt the American forces as the months unfolded. As the battle continued, tactical innovations began to emerge amid the relentless fighting. The Marines, adapting to the fierce conditions, employed a combination of infantry assaults accompanied by coordinated artillery and close air support, especially as they began to grapple with the brutal realities of positional warfare. They conducted flanking maneuvers aimed at drawing the defenders out of their concrete pits, utilizing patterns of movement that sought to exploit weaknesses in Japanese lines. However, these tactics came at a harrowing psychological cost, as each inch gained was often through a sea of bloodshed. For the Marines who fought in this harrowing environment, the need to maintain cohesion and morale amid the physical and mental toll highlighted the grave ramifications of warfare. Individual acts of bravery became commonplace, as soldiers often risked their lives to rescue comrades near the front lines, further infusing this engagement with the stark reality of valor, juxtaposed with the chaos of combat. Medical evacuations became a lifeline for wounded Marines, but such operations were fraught with danger. The proximity of frontline positions to Japanese snipers introduced a new layer of complexity to medical logistics. Corpsmen, often viewed as heroes among the Marines, operated under extreme duress as they moved onto the battlefield to provide care, while simultaneously navigating a cacophony of gunfire. Their training emphasized a unique form of courage, as they demonstrated an instinctual understanding of both tactical awareness and compassion under fire. Each instance of triage became a testament not only to their medical skill, but to the human spirit, encapsulating the interplay between suffering and survival. The sheer desperation of their efforts forced innovations in combat medicine, leading to the establishment of evacuation protocols that would later influence military healthcare practices. Strategically, the Battle of Peleliu had broader implications that stretched beyond its immediate context. Every day extended the timeline of the campaign, creating a strain on logistical support networks as the United States Marine Corps found its supply lines tested against the backdrop of a protracted engagement. The logistical demands of sustaining an assault on an entrenched enemy so far into enemy territory, compounded with the island's limited resources, resulted in critical shortages of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. The urgency to maintain supply lines highlighted a fundamental principle of warfare. Logistical triumphs and failures often dictated outcomes as decisively as combat prowess. As battles raged on the ground, commanders back in the Pacific theater faced the urgent need to recalibrate their strategic approaches. Decisions regarding allocations of resources and troop movements became increasingly fraught with uncertainty and significant risk. The psychological toll of prolonged conflict on individuals began to surface profoundly among the ranks. The interminable grind of combat left lasting impressions on the Marines participating in the battle, as hopes for a swift victory dwindled to near impossibility. The landscape became littered not only with physical reminders of slaughter, but also with mental scars that would endure long after the fighting ceased. The pervasive threat of death weighed heavily. Every decision was laced with an awareness of its potential consequences. The erosion of morale led to an increased prevalence of combat fatigue among soldiers, a condition that demanded recognition in both leadership circles and medical channels. Commanders faced a delicate balance between maintaining operational integrity and preserving the psychological well-being of their men, navigating a reality that contradicted the glamour often depicted in wartime propaganda. As Peleliu trudged on, the Marines sought to reclaim agency amid chaos, grappling with an array of challenges that seemed insurmountable. The fighting devolved into a series of isolated and brutal engagements, punctuated by moments of quiet reflection and stark reality for those who survived. Even as American forces fought tenaciously for every inch of ground, the repercussions of their actions emerged as a haunting paradox. A conflict that, while intended to advance American military objectives, inevitably bore witness to the tremendous human suffering it engendered. Each Marine was left with the indelible mark of the island's brutality etched within their psyche. The compounded grief for fallen comrades weighed against each fleeting moment of survival. The complexities of modern warfare thrust upon the participants of this engagement a complex interplay of heroism and horror, forcing them into a narrative that examined not merely the tactical outcomes, but the profound emotional waves they experienced amidst a relentless tide of violence. Thus the battle, a once promising military objective, devolved into a protracted struggle of attrition, revealed the harsh truths of war. On the surface, Peleliu remains a narrative defined by valor and sacrifice, but upon closer examination, the battle crystallizes the unpredictable nature of warfare, a testament to both the horrors of combat and the unwavering human spirit that endures against insurmountable odds. Each Marine's experience diverged into individual tales of courage as they forged an understanding of duty, fear, and sacrifice in a place that would forever redefine their identities. It painted a broader picture of the war as a tapestry of resilience, woven with the threads of collective experiences laid bare within the ruins of the Pacific theater, emphasizing that while military objectives might be achieved, the cost of such victories often transcends mere strategy, leaving scars on the soul long after the guns have fallen silent.